Good afternoon and warm welcome to the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library webinar series. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Professor Kulbhushan Warikoo. Professor Warikoo has just completed his tenure as senior fellow here. He is a well-known expert on Central Asia. For 30 years, he was a professor at the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, Central Asian Studies at the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Has written a number of books, I think around 20, on this and related subjects. And today's topic, Kashmir Xinjiang Linkages in Modern and Contemporary Times. Uh, it's an area of expertise for him, and the topic is very relevant because of the current geopolitical situation. We tend to think of trade, commerce, and other linkages more in terms of modern national identities and geographical boundaries because naturally we live in our own times. The fact, however, is that, and this is something that I have argued elsewhere, that the role of Central Asia in the history of mankind, especially in the economic history and in the history of trade and commerce, has been much neglected. Now, one of the main reasons this has happened is that geographically speaking, Central Asia did not produce any sedentary civilization. It was surrounded by a number of sedentary civilizations such as India, China, Europe, farther to the northwest, and of course, uh, Iran, and in earlier times, other civilizations. But and the it is these sedentary civilizations which basically had tradition, they had language, etc. So they created documents and other resources on the basis of which historians and other experts they write about this. So I think Professor Warikoo is also talking about the Silk Road here. What we describe as the Silk Road, of course, I have argued elsewhere that there was no Silk Road, but leaving that thing aside, whatever we call it, the fact is that it is from Central Asia that different kind of trade routes and other routes they jutted out to in all corners, and Kashmir being adjacent to Central Asia for thousands of years, and Kashmir in this wider sense, not in the sense of valley, but in the sense that it includes the entire you know uh, POK and Baltistan and all other areas, northern areas. So Kashmir was an important part of these economic and trade linkages for thousands of years, and of course, this also led to a lot of cultural linkages. Uh, we know that Buddhism is spread from India to Central Asia, and in fact, it remained there till the rise of Islam there in Central Asia. So these linkages have been there for thousands of years, but the emerging geopolitics in the modern times has affected those linkages, and especially the partition of India in 1947 brought about a fundamental shift in the geographical situation of the Indian subcontinent and its links with Central Asia. They saw, I would not say a complete rupture, certainly not, but certainly there has been some kind of a rupture. So, in that context, this topic, Kashmir Xinjiang linkages in modern and contemporary times, is very, very important. Once again, I would like to welcome Professor Warikoo and request him to proceed with his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. I have, as you know, I took up this theme here as part of my senior fellowship, which I completed duly in time. But I have been working on this theme since 19, actually since 79. So I have been progress. It has been in work in progress. It came into fruition only during the past 2 3 years. But the materials collected at National Archives, India Office Records, JNK Archives, etc., was done by me over a period of two decades, 2.5 decades. Why it was important? Because I was those days in Kashmir and I came across certain individuals and certain some senior, very senior journalists who are no more, and some important personages who were involved in this trans-Himalayan trade. Abdul Wahid Radu and Biharlal Parashar from Hoshiarpur. Abdul Wahid Radu was operating between Ladakh, Tibet, and Nepal and Xinjiang. Parashar stayed in Yarkand for about 16 years as an agent, trade agent for a firm. So I had a series of interviews and meetings with him in 1983. So with Radu, I had also in around 1980, 1981. So I got very important inputs from them, and which is what persuaded me to delve into this matter in a detailed manner. Number one is the geographical contiguity between Kashmir and Xinjiang. By Kashmir, we mean entire undivided former state of Jammu and Kashmir, including Ladakh, Hunza, Gilgit, Baltistan, and adjoining frontier territories. And by Xinjiang, we mean the current Chinese pronunciation
I
of.
think, sir, you should try to speak a bit louder. I can see
अच्छा
Meenakshi ji.
अच्छा नहीं कोई नहीं. By Kashmir, we mean undivided state of J&K includes Ladakh, because Ladakh had the valley, didn't have any direct touch with Xinjiang. It is Ladakh, Gilgit, coterminous with Xinjiang. And by Xinjiang, I have used the term Xinjiang, which is the official term Xinjiang or Uyghur Autonomous Region, but in the process of study, several terms have been used: Chinese Turkestan, Xinjiang, Eastern Turkestan, Kashgar, Kashgaria, Altai Shahar, etc. So it is also cultural affinity between this our Indian state of rather state of Jammu and Kashmir and Xinjiang. That has also played important role in India's relations with Central Asia since early times. But in modern and contemporary times, this extent of political and pattern of political and economic contacts between Kashmir and Xinjiang was conditioned by Anglo-Russian rivalry over Central Asia during 19th and early 20th century, and after that, after 1947, definitely by Pakistan, Sino-Pak strategic alliance, and the Xinjiang factor and Pakistan's physical position of Gilgit and Hunza play pivotal role in that relationship. So, in fact, China has now not only brought the remote northwest frontier region of Xinjiang close to China's mainland by air, rail, and road, it has turned Xinjiang into a breach to extend its direct links with adjoining Central Asia and also with Pakistan via Karakoram Highway and now CPEC. During this process of study, when I was studying Karakoram Highway or Xinjiang's relationship with Gilgit, Xinjiang's relationship with Hunza during 19th, 18th, and early 20th century, I wondered how Chinese diplomacy has been consistent in spite of their being a very weak position. They were begging even Raja of Ladakh, not to speak of Gulab Singh and Ranbir Singh of Kashmir, for help whenever they were confronted by militant rebels or Khoja Muslim rebels and separatists in Xinjiang. So they would seek succor from Raja of Ladakh, Raja of Hunza, Sardar Ali, Ghaznafar, and also from Gulab Singh and Ranbir Singh. And the Dogra rulers of Kashmir saw to it, and they were very practical, pragmatic, and they maintained very cordial and close relationship with the chiefs of Kashgar. Not only that, but up to Badakhshan, and they, matlab, their maneuvering was superb. And how did they reach out to these far-flung places without any present means of communication? And it is, it is very, it is to be taken note of. And it was very pragmatic, and they knew the importance of this strategic frontier region lying across the Himalayas, across the Karakoram. Kashmir was the cradle from where Buddhism spread to Xinjiang and further to Central Asia, Tibet, and China. Kashmiri scholars and monks were held in high esteem. They translated a number of Buddhist and Sanskrit texts into Chinese. I think now, coming to its practical aspect, what should be its what lesson we should draw is that since many of these texts have become concerted steps need to be taken to retrieve these scriptures, texts which are still preserved in China, Mongolia, Buryatia, etc. Xinjiang was virtually an extended cultural, literary, and Buddhist space. And Gilgit, Chilas, Chitral, Baltistan, Ladakh, Zanskar, and other frontier areas of Kashmir played, they have been important mileposts of this route. The preponderance of carvings and inscriptions of prehistoric and Buddhist period in Gilgit-Baltistan region provide sufficient evidence of the prevalence of Buddhism in this region in pre-Islamic times. The sites at Shatial, Thor, Thaplan, Shingnala, Satpara, Karga, Chlas that still today exist have high concentration of drawings of stupas, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Jatakas, etc. Besides thousands of inscriptions written in Kharoshthi, Brahmi, Sanskrit, Sogdian, and Tibetan scripts, some 80% are in Brahmi script. Professor Karl Jatmer and his team in PAC German study group did pioneering work on these rock carvings and inscriptions. The diversity and density of rock carvings, about 50,000 carvings and 5,000 inscriptions in Gilgit-Baltistan region, turned this area into one of the most important petroglyph sites in the world. Unfortunately, over 30,000 carvings and inscriptions will be are in the process of being inundated due to the ongoing construction of Diamir Basha Dam. The world famous Gilgit manuscript Lotus Sutra written on birch bark was first discovered in 1931 near in a ruined stupa near Gilgit. So obviously it was through this region, which was the crossroads of ancient roots and cultures, and attracted travelers, traders, and pilgrims, that Buddhism was transmitted to Xinjiang and beyond. Young men and from Kashgar, Khotan, Kucha, and other places would come to Kashmir for higher learning during that time. Buddhism spread to Xinjiang and beyond during Ashoka's time. Small colonies of Indians had come up in parts of southern Xinjiang along the Silk Route. Chinese scholars confirm that a Kashmiri monk Virochana had built a Buddhist shrine in Khotan in 80 BC. They also affirm that Buddhist art as an arm of the religion was introduced in Khotan in Xinjiang from Kashmir. And from Khotan, Buddhism spread to Kashgar, Nia, Cherchen, Lolan, Aksu, Kucha, Karashal, Turfan, and further to other parts of China through Kansu. Kanishk actually organized the fourth Buddhist Council in Kashmir, in which around 500 Buddhist scholars are said to have participated, many from Xinjiang region also. I quote a contemporary Chinese scholar who says, I quote, people of China know about Kashmir. China has had a tradition of history writing since ancient times. Same tradition existed in Kashmir in the form of Rajtarangni. Historiographical tradition of Kashmir is very ancient, and the connection between Kashmir and China is by over 2000 year old. This is what a, Chinese scholar had written around 19, I think 2000. A long series of Kashmiri monks and scholars who combined at the same time a high standard of learning, linguistic and exegetic, with the audacity of explorers, contributed to spread of Buddhism in Xinjiang, Central China. To name a few, Sangbhuti, Gotama, Sangdev, Punyartra, Dharmayasas, Vimalksh, Bodhyasas, Dharmamitra and Kumarji played key role in the propagation of Buddhism in Xinjiang and China. They were from Kashmir. At the same time, Chinese pilgrims and scholars also traveled long distances to reach Kashmir in their quest for knowledge. So this vibrant action of man and learning and spirituality between Kashmir and Xinjiang continued at least till 10th century. To name a few Chinese, Haiyan, Chimong, Fayong, Kionsong, Hongkong, Wukong were notable Chinese pilgrims who traveled overland from China through Xinjiang to Gilgit, through Pamis, Ladakh, and Kashmir. And it was during Tang dynasty, that is from 7th to 9th century, that political contacts between Kashmir and Xinjiang were consolidated during the rule of Kalkutta dynasties. Xinjiang, China was facing hostile Arabs at Tibetan incursions in 7th century, and Tang court had established diplomatic contacts with at least three important kingdoms. One is Kapisa, that is around present-day Kabul region, then Zabulistan, that is present-day Ghazni region, and then Kashmir. Al-Biruni speaks of, when he was in the region, he speaks of a victory by Lalta in 8th century over the Turks, and that Kashmiris continued to celebrate this victory even in his time. So Tang annals inform that in 8th century, ambassadors were exchanged between Kashmiri ruler Chandrapida and Lalta and Tang rulers. And in 720 AD, the Tang court is reported to have dispatched an envoy to Kashmir to bestow the title of King of Kashmir to Chandrapida. In 733, his successor Laltaditya Muktapida sent his envoy to Chinese emperor, about informing about his military victory over the Tibetans and his offer of continued support to China. So I quote scholar Tansen Sen. He says, elated by Laltaditya's offer of support, Chinese emperor praised the Kashmiri king and bestowed the title of king on him. Such was the, because both were having adverse enemies in the form of Tibetans and Arabs. Khotan was the citadel of Buddhism which fell to Islamic invaders in early 11th century. It had a colony of monks, Kashmiri monks and settlers. Orlstan, when he explored in the region, he was struck with the resemblance of features between the Khotanese and the Kashmir. I quote him, a resemblance difficult to define, it all the more noteworthy on account of unmistakable peculiarity of type presented by Kashmir. In fact, when I visited Khotan long back around 1994, so I also noticed a striking similarity between the physique or the features of the Khotanese girls and ladies and Kashmiri girls. And then, where a hotel where we were staying, I also noticed in that hotel, in the ceilings, the mandala pictures, symbols, yantra symbols drawn on the ceilings. So that time it didn't sink in. See, now I realize that the memory, old memory, the relationship or the Buddhist past was still. I am not sure what is the current situation, but I talk of around June 1994. Since Ladakh enjoyed a central position in the network of caravan routes, it acted as a gateway in the India-Xinjiang exchange of trade, exchange of materials. Leh was the terminal point of multilateral trade carrying between India, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Central Asia. Ladakh's place in this trade was only of a transit emporium. Bulk of trade passed through Srinagar, Leh, Yarkand route, and I have examined all the trade figures between 1860 to from 1860 to 1937, whichever was available to me in the archives. So I have found that Tibet, there was no direct connection between Xinjiang and Tibet during that period. Whatever goods were going to Tibet, these were going from Ladakh, India, Ladakh, or Kashmir, Kishtwar, Ladakh, and Xinjiang, Ladakh, and from there to Tibet. So this is an important point. Tibet received Chinese goods such as silver, ingots, carpets, China silk, horse cotton goods from Ladakh, which in turn had received it from Xinjiang. So Indian trade with Yarkand, Kashmir, Khotan was carried through Kashmir and Ladakh. Xinjiang's export to Ladakh and Kashmir comprised gold, silver, hemp, that is charas, cannabis, shawl wool, carpets, felts, Chinese teacups, leatherware, coarse cotton cloth, raw silk, ponies. Out of these items, bullion, cannabis, raw silk, and shawl wool were the major imports. Yarkandi and Adinjani traders would bring these goods to Ladakh, where they exchange the same with their Indian counterparts. Occasionally, these traders would go further to Amritsar and Punjab and Kashmir to realize better profits. Similarly, Indian traders would also proceed beyond Ladakh towards Yarkand to make direct purchases at relatively lower prices. Indian traders brought to Leh Indian and British made cotton cloth, brocades, Kashmir shawls, indigo, spices, dyed goat skins, opium, preserved fruits, coral, indigenous Ayurvedic medicines, sugar, and books. And Indian exports to Xinjiang were tea, indigo, dyes, paints, muslin, brocades, kimkham, velvet, cotton goods, red dyed goat skins, otter skins, furs, sugar, spices, indigenous, and coral, for which items there was good demand among the people of Central Asia. Indian goods were consumed in southern also cities of Yarkand, Kashgar, Khotan, Maralbashi, Yangisar, Kargalik, and also in Xinjiang. Kashmir's involvement in this trade was limited to being a transit station for the transmission of Indian goods. During the years 1917 to 1931, I have figures 28.5 million rupees worth goods were exported from India to Xinjiang. In the same period, merchandise valued at 33 billion rupees was imported from Xinjiang. So, India Xinjiang trade had scaled unprecedented height of more than 6.8 million during the year 1920-21. But then it began to decline with the opening of Russian trade with Xinjiang. And from late 1930s onwards, internal disorders in Xinjiang began to act as a stumbling block to this trade, which finally ceased to flow in 1995, since 1949, following the communist takeover of Xinjiang and closure of Xinjiang to outside traffic. This deprived Ladakh and Kashmir of their importance as emporia of Indo-Central Asian our trade that passed through a network of caravan trails crisscrossing this region. As against the Leh Yarkand Kashgar route, Gilgit Kashgar route was much less frequented. In 1936, total trade carried via Gilgit route was only 1 lakh rupees as against 20 lakh rupees traded via Leh Yarkand route. That is, it was less by 20. Why I am highlighting this issue? Because this difficult Gilgit Kashgar route has been developed as a major highway, Karakoram Highway, since 1972 or 73, and now it has been upgraded as part of CPEC. It gives impetus to Pakistan's strategic depth in Central Asia And as against this situation, India is caged in its strategic bottleneck, lacking all sort, and it has no overland connectivity with Central Asia. And while as China is pursuing its BRI Belt and Road Initiative, India could think of engaging China for reviving the traditional Karakoram Pass, Yarkand, Kashgar, and Dechinchan Mui, Yarkand routes to Xinjiang, and relay Dimchuk, Lhasa, Gartuk route also. As I said earlier, through its history, China has remained vulnerable in Xinjiang to domestic rebellions and external pressures. In Tang period, when China was faced with Arab, Turk, and Tibetan attacks in Xinjiang, Tang rulers sought support of and alliance with Kashmir ruler Lalta Aditya. They received Lalta Aditya's ambassador with honor. Similarly, in medieval and modern times, Chinese authorities in Xinjiang sought friendship with and support of Dogra rulers of Kashmir, chiefs of Hunza and Ladakh, against the Kyrgyz, Khoja, and other rebels in Xinjiang. And now the things have taken a reverse in contemporary times. China has found a subservient ally and partner in Pakistan, which has been occupying Gilgit and Baltistan since 1948 to fulfill its strategic objectives through its military alliance and now CPEC and Karakoram. As regards I would reflect upon the relationship between Dogras and the Xinjiang rulers. Dogra rulers Gulab Singh and his son Maharaja Ranbir Singh, though subject to British paramountcy, continued to maintain their relations with Central Asia and Tibet. But the British they were very opposed, they were averse to any sort of direct diplomatic contact between Kashmir Darbar and Central Asian chiefs. For their part, Dogra rulers of Kashmir sought to retain their influence in Xinjiang and regularly exchange envoys with the region, often without the knowledge of the British resident or British agents posted there. The Dogra rulers would provide hospitality to any visiting nobility, chiefs, envoys from Konkan, Eastern Turkestan, who would visit Ladakh and Kashmir intermittently as envoys or as emissaries or as Hajj pilgrims for going to Hajj or for trade. Occasionally, Central Asian fugitives, for instance, there was regime change. There was one Khoja rebel would come up and other would become fugitive. These fugitives would flee to Ladakh and Kashmir either to escape reprisals from their rivals at home or to bring their wealth, gold, silver out of Xinjiang safely to Ladakh and Kashmir and to seek moral and material support from Dogra rulers of Kashmir and his representatives. So we have the families of Habibullah Khan, former chief of Khotan, Beg Kuli Beg, son and successor of Yaqub Beg, Said Yaqub Tora, envoy of Yaqub Beg, and so many wealthy merchants, nobles seeking to stay or keep their wealth in Kashmir without any threat to their lives and property. Most of these fugitives used Kashmir as their first stopover before they would migrate to Turkey or maybe Russian Turkestan. But British were very intelligent and shrewd. They used the Kashmir's ongoing friendly contacts with the rulers of Kashgaria as a ready-made lodging pad for playing their great game in Xinjiang and Central Asia. Kashmir and its frontier territories proved to be valuable listening posts for the British, not only to monitor developments there, but also to launch their missions such as Robert Shah, Thomas Forsyth, Nee Elias, and many others to Kashmir, Bailey, FM Bailey to Kashmir from Kashmir to Xinjiang. Now, what was the British game now that Xinjiang, Russian Central Asia came into the hands of Russia? Earlier, they were trying to prevent Russians from taking over Turkestan, and they were using their bases in Kashmir, Ladakh, Gilgit, Hunza, etc., to prevent their Russian forward movement in Central Asia. Once they failed in that, then they tried to consolidate their presence in Xinjiang, and they did it through by stationing their permanent agent, McCartney, their representative in Kashmir, because Russian representative Petrovsky was already there. So all energy of the Britain was focused on hosting or having physical presence of their British agent McCartney, who was Chinese very well, and he was there for about 1890. He went along with the young husband, stayed there till 1913 or something. And then he was succeeded by others, Itherton and others. So Kashmir was important in this big power game as it was used as convenience outpost for extending British control over the tribal territories and monitoring Russian and then Soviet movements in Central Asia and Xinjiang. Another important aspect which came across my study, which I didn't know earlier, Hunza, which is now under the control of Pakistan, it exercised important rights in Trans-Karakoram Tract and Tagdumbush Parliament, Shimshal, Shexgam and Raskam Valley. It is established beyond doubt. So successive means of Hunza maintained their cordial relations with the Chinese authorities in Xinjiang. They would exchange annual presents with them, but only because they wanted to retain their physical rights in these regions. So on their part, Chinese authorities were in awe of the Hunzakuts or Hunza chief and his tribes due to their strong fighting capacities and their raids on the farmers and trading caravans. Hunza exercised its cultivation rights in Raskam and collected taxes in Tagdumbush up to at least till 1937. Even during the warlord regimes in Xinjiang, Hunza exercised its cultivation rights in Raskam and collected taxes from Tagdumbush farmers. During Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, Hunza envoys and General Zhao, nationalist deputy commander-in-chief of Xinjiang Garrison Force, signed an agreement to restore old connections between Hunza and Xinjiang in early 1948. That is before communist regime was installed there. But due to the ongoing armed conflict between India and Pakistan and Kashmir and occupation of Gilgit, including Hunza by Pakistan, now all external relations of Hunza were conducted by Pakistan. And now again, here you see the British machinations which has been most damaging to Indian interests. Due to their preoccupation with their broader imperial interests, British did not pursue the matter of definition of Hunza's border with Xinjiang or Ladakh's border with Xinjiang. Their priority remained to post a consular officer as their representative in Kashmir. With the result, India-China border in Hinza, Ladakh sectors was not demarcated. So the British policy of appeasing China meant abandoning Kashmir's claims on Shahidullah or keeping Hunza claims on Raskam Tagdumbush on the back burner. Instead, the British encouraged the Chinese. The young husband went from here and induced the Chinese authorities in Xinjiang, please come to this point. Yeah, this is a no man's land. Otherwise, Russians would come. Please take this, occupy this no man's land in the Tagdumush Parnal because they wanted to forestall Russians from occupying the same. So they were reluctant, Chinese were reluctant. They were made to occupy the vacant territory in the Trans-Karakoram. Maharaja had a fort in Shahidullah, much beyond Karakoram. He wanted to occupy it. They did not allow him to occupy and instead asked the Chinese to come and occupy it. So then, the result of this, Chinese were acutely conscious of their historical legacy and the legacy of direct contacts between Xinjiang and Hunza and Gilgit. So they used it to the hilt and they China and Pakistan signed the Sino-Pak boundary agreement on 2nd March 1963. Everything was covered there. Pakistan sovereignty over thousands of square kilometers in the Trans-Karakoram areas of Raskam, Shaksgam, and Takdumbush. However, Pakistan claims to have gained about 750 square miles of territory, including salt mines of Upper. But the main gainer is China, and then this agreement paved way for very strong Sino-Pak strategic alliance on the frontier, and then it was followed by constructing Karakoram Highway, and which has been further taken now to upgrade it as being part of CPEC. So this is the importance of this studying this entire region in a holistic perspective. With these words, I will conclude maybe if there is any.
Thank you very much, Professor Warikoo, for this very informative and incisive lecture on the subject. We are now open to questions and comments. Ji, Amit ji.
A very interesting topic, but what we are missing, maps and route. We are unable to understand exactly what was the route. This is Hunja Xinjiang route, Ladakh Xinjiang.
किताब आएगी, it is in process, उसमें आप पढ़ लें.
Second thing, Ladakh Xinjiang trade started to diminish the comparatively that become very low in late 19th century, even 20th century. And what was the main reason? What not?
लो कहाँ मैंने तो बताया बढ़ गया. 1920 was the highest point.
उसके बाद सर. Sorry.
बात तो बताया ना जब internal disorder in Xinjiang and Russia, Soviets were in Russia and Pakistan, and then the Soviet influence in Xinjiang, and then closure of Xinjiang to outside traffic in 1949.
Is there any chance to revival of local trade?
Local code.
Local trade, Ladakh, Xinjiang, that is local.
वो तो स्मगलिंग तो चल ही रही थी लोकल का. तो आपका तमाशा देखते हैं आप तो लोकल नहीं है.
That's quite a frank admission.
It is not a local. You are an Indian. You should not call it a local. Never encourage anything local.
जी,
ये बारीक चीजें हैं. इसको ये का वो डिस्कशन में इस तरह मतलब ना लूज टॉक करने से गड़बड़ा जाता है माहौल. नहीं मतलब आप समझे नहीं. आप समझे नहीं. ये बहुत बारीक चीजें हैं. मैं तो आप तो नहीं समझोगे. इतना लिखने के बाद भी आप पढ़ोगे अगर टाइम मिलेगा तो जिसको समझना है और जिसको एक्शन करना है आपको मैं उदाहरण देता हूँ.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a very informative talk. We know about so many Chinese travelers who came to India to learn Buddhism, etc. But from that Kashmir area, apart from Kumar Vijay, I think. हाँ, उसके अलावा और कुछ है? Are there any big names?
I had mentioned ये 7-8-9.
Okay.
संघभूति was पहले.
Okay.
गौतम संघ देवा, पुण्यात्रा, धर्मयासास, विमलक्षा, बुद्धयासास, धर्ममित्रा. बहुत काम किया है.
That is very evident, sir.
उन्होंने बहुत काम किया है. मतलब इन लोगों का तो कैसे चाइना ने अपनी फौज भेजी कुमार जी को लाने के लिए.
हाँ, बिल्कुल.
जा नहीं रहा था.
Yes.
कोचा से.
His mother was a person from that area.
कोचिया. बट वो भी कश्मीर आई थी पढ़ने के लिए 2 साल. उसके बाद काशगर में कुछ हिनियान या कौन सा उन्होंने पढ़ा. देन बहुत जबरदस्त काम.
We have a question online. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Hello, sir. Sir, I have a question. I have read that Xinjiang literally means new frontiers. So, is China claiming that Xinjiang is integral part of China since ancient time? Is a claim unfounded for? Thank you.
Well, China has played its game very well. Xinjiang, Xinjiang, or Xinjiang. This name was given in 1884. That is new territories. New territories. तो इसको acquire करा गया था 1884 में. Finally incorporated as part of China, as a province of China. That is why this name was given. और जो लोग शिंजांग को जानते हैं या चाइनीज पॉलिसी इन दिस रीजन जानते हैं, तो दे हैव एस्टैब्लिश्ड physically their presence in this region, in various parts of region, by erecting stone slabs which show that this Chinese Tang emperor or this emperor, अब ये नहीं पता कि उन्होंने खुद इंस्क्राइब करे पुराने. I have seen it in on Alashenko border, Kazakhstan and Xinjiang में, and Khargos border, Xinjiang and उसमें दो जगह मैंने खुद देखे वो. और अंदर भी in various parts of Xinjiang they have installed various. They are trying to resurrect the memory of ancient association of China with this, or Chinese presence in. It is a sharp lesson. मतलब अब क्या बताएं, आपके मार्तंड को क्या बोलते हैं आजकल जो एंशियंट है कश्मीर में? शैतान का वो, हाँ, शैतान गुफा. मार्तंड हारी पर्वत जो 2.5 करोड़ देवी देवताओं का वास है, कोहिमारान, शंकराचार्य तख्त सुलेमान, श्रीनगर जो प्रवर सेन ने श्रीनगरी सिटी बनाई थी, शहरी खास. तो कोई यहाँ इसके ऊपर समझता है, सोचता है, बोलता है?
I think, sir, the point raised by him, I would just like to add that basically the modern Chinese nationalism has adopted the model of claiming all the territories that had any, even a most tenuous kind of association in the past few thousand years. The way China has constructed its national geography, if India were to do it, probably half of Eurasia or 1/3 of Eurasia will be part of it. Now, of course, the Chinese are very good, as Professor Warikoo said, at creating history, constructing history basically.
Recording.
And I may say one thing, certainly what is now Xinjiang, other parts of Central Asia, Inner Mongolia, Tibet, all these regions which constitute no less than 50% of the present Chinese territory, they were historically the periphery of various Chinese empires. And the fact is that from all these regions, China throughout its history faced enormous threats. From the Mongolia, of course, enormous threats, but also from Xinjiang region, from Tibet. Tibet invaded China and occupied.
That is how they came close to.
Now, what has happened is that since the rise of the Communist Party, and not the rise of the Communist Party as such, but the founding of the Communist Republic in China, their model has been to occupy all those lands which were periphery of China in some way or the other, because they thought, one, that they had a legitimate claim to these things, which I would argue they never existed. But the other reason was that they perceived, because it is rooted in their historical memory, the independence of these regions as a threat to Chinese independence. Now, the problem is, as Professor Warikoo has talked about, when the British were in this country, their main concern was preventing the Russians from entering the subcontinent. The Chinese were quite weak then, and therefore their threat was not important. And therefore, in Central Asia, in Kashmir, Ladakh, and here, yes, the British were actually focusing on preventing the Russians. So they were ready to give some concessions to the Chinese. Now things have reversed. So now it is the Chinese who need to be sort of stopped. So this is another complication that has crept into the picture. Anyway, any other questions? Yes, I think we have a question there from Ashutosh Singh. Xinjiang literally means, oh, okay, new frontiers.
Yes,
So is
hold
the
on.
Chinese calling? This is done, of course.
Hold on.
When China can call the South China Sea as virtually an integral part of China, so what to talk about
शिंजांग
Xinjiang?
पे तो उनको सवा कोई कि कुछ भी करे उससे मस्त नहीं हो सकता.
And the interesting thing is, sir, that the last Chinese empire, this King Empire, that itself was of foreign origin, Manchus. And there was so much opposition, as we know, when the nationalist China started rising in the early 20th century, they were dead opposed to the king. So much so that the grave of the dowager, a queen, it was dug up because they were regarded as foreigners.
But as regards the frontier policy,
Frontier
there is a
policy they have
continuity
adopted.
from Tang period till now. उसमें कोई
So it would be
diversion
like
नहीं.
us condemning, say, the Mughals or the British on the one hand, but laying claim to all the territories which might have belonged to them. So we can lay claim to Kabul or maybe even to. Oh, that thing aside, in terms of policy, this is what it is. In terms of intention
We
and
are
policy,
good
this is what it is.
and poster छापने में we are very good. But physically, you see, Chinese presence strength in Xinjiang is XPCC, Xinjiang Production Construction Core. करीब 1.5 million ex-servicemen और बाकी Chinese and they are engineers, etc. They are running the whole show. एक तो physically they are present in Xinjiang with their families, and they tomato export, vegetable export, cotton export, or baki industrial production and gas energy. It is all in their hands. So the economy is also. So जो सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी ने अभी कहा, तो अभी हमारी सोच उस लेवल तक जब तक वो मैंने एक चैप्टर दैट इज I have written a specific chapter China's policy in Xinjiang and comparison with Indian experience in Kashmir. So that is a comprehensive chapter both to be sure. So,
But isn't this understood, Professor Warikoo, that any nation state, when it becomes powerful beyond a point, it does try to sort of expand in various ways. The Chinese model is particularly abrasive, of course, it is there.
है but इनके fundamentals strong है. आप मान लो आपके fundamentals नहीं है ही नहीं कुछ. सारा बदल अभी मामूली चीज तो इतना हंगामा उठता है. यहाँ मामूली सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक्स है. 1990 में इंडिपेंडेंट हो गया. I have covered all the republics except in Turkmenistan. So right in from the very beginning 1990 में ही बल्कि even earlier they had thought in mind कि हमें क्या करना है. पहले street names जो भी पुष्किन स्क्वायर, लेनिन स्क्वायर, ताशकंद, ये वो सारा चेंज within first 2 years of their power, that is 90 to 93, समझो सारा चेंज हो गया. कहीं कोई नाम नहीं रहा पुरानी सोवियत उसका और रशियन नेम्स. Second was a simultaneous rewriting of history. I have stayed with अंदीजान में मैं प्रोफेसर शमसुद्दीन था, तो मैं उसके घर रहा हूँ. उसने मुझे तो वही वाज इंचार्ज. बाबा जन गफूर ताशकंद में था, वो अंदीजान में था और इधर बाकी लोग थे. तो इनको जितने भी इंटेलेक्चुअल्स थे, आइडियोलॉग्स थे, they were tasked with they were given the task of rewriting the history of their nation. तो सारा इन्होंने अपने हिसाब से, आप कोई और कुछ कहेगा, इनको क्यों नहीं वेस्टर्न ऑथर्स और वेस्टर्न जर्नलिस्ट और मीडिया ये कहते हैं कि इन्होंने ये किया, ट्विस्ट किया, वो किया, ये किया. सारा एलिमिनेट करा पुराना. एंड नॉट ओनली एलिमिनेट बट इट हैज बीन प्रोजेक्टेड. इतनी सड़कें, इतना डेवलपमेंट सेंट्रल एशिया में वहाँ पे गधे पे डंकी वाज द मीडियम ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्टेशन, और न बिजली न पानी न कुछ, तो सारा इतना मैसिव डेवलपमेंट हुआ 70 साल में, बट वो सारा इट हैज बीन ब्रश, है ना, ब्लैक ब्रश से सारा कुछ, मतलब एज एन एलियन एंड ऑप्रेसिव कॉलोनियल रिजीम, तो इन्होंने अपना नया नैरेटिव क्रिएट करा, एंड दैट इज, अच्छा लैंग्वेजेस भी, कजाकिस्तान में कजक लैंग्वेज पहले कहते थे इनको नहीं आएगा ये अपना, दे डोंट हैव दिस, so now they have their own languages, and they have anybody who doesn't know Kazakh language or any local language is not eligible to be to stand for elections, leave alone to stand to get an office.
We have a question. Please use mic.
Yeah. I have a brief comment, brief. Yeah, so the point basically is that, that obviously 1,000 years back, as you pointed out, the focus was more on the Central Asia, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, for the trade, because the trade was dynamics were a lot more different. But how do you relate it with the evolving times today, with the Belt and Road, because the China is much more focused on, Europe, US, etc., with the supply chains, big tech, etc. So how do you see that relationship evolving? Because now the trade dynamics are going to be completely towards the West, rather than be focused over
it should not be seen only from trade and economic perspective. It has to be seen from a strategic and geopolitical perspective. So China is, अब ये देखिए after Corona and this thing Ukraine, it may lead to some shift, but so far as my understanding is, China is very strong in North Xinjiang तो है ही है, Xinjiang is, but Central Asia में भी they have gone much ahead. मतलब उन ताजिकिस्तान में they what they do, I think कब में 2014 2015 में काफी टाइम दिया. I went up to Palmy's में नीचे बदख्शान से up to last village of Wakhan corridor भी मैं गया, because I wanted to study, have some, जो कश्मीर मेरे बैग में था कि यहाँ पे इन्होंने क्या किया है, तो वाखान कॉरिडोर तक, वहां तक चीनी आ गए हैं, वो सारा संभाल रहे हैं सब कुछ, ऐसा कोई दिक्कत नहीं होता. आई डोंट थिंक एनीबडी कैन, और वो उसको थ्रू सीपैक थ्रू बियारा, अब अफगानिस्तान को वहाँ कॉपर माइंस भी है, वो भी है, इकोनॉमिक्स भी देखते हैं, बट जो पोलिटिकल इंटरेस्ट भी देखते हैं.
Even with Sri Lanka also, they have completely got them into debt.
अब it is up to the countries concerned how do they respond. अब श्रीलंका अब कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड करेगा या पाकिस्तान कैसे करेगा. बट ये ताजिकिस्तान में भूल गया बताना, वो वहां पर मैंने देखा अराउंड 1000 और 2000 ट्रक्स इन्होंने इसकी ताजिक प्रेसिडेंट की बेटी को, शी वाज रनिंग दिस ट्रांसपोर्ट बिजनेस, कार्गो वगैरह, तो फिर मुझे पूछा ही कैसे, ये तो बोला कि इन्होंने 1000 इसको दे दिया, 1000 ट्रक, किसी को कुछ दे दिया, किसी को, तो मैसिव स्केल पे करप्शन है, करप्शन भी है, बट ये काम कर निकालना जानते हैं. दे हैव क्लियरिटी इन देयर, मतलब फ्रंटियर को कैसे हैंडल करना है, यहाँ पे क्लियरिटी नहीं है. डिलिमिटेशन कमीशन बनाया, जिनको अभी मौका था, जो 70 साल में गलती हो गई थी, अभी मौका था उसको सुधारने का, कुछ नहीं किया है. अनफॉर्चुनेट ये भाषणबाजी. This was the last time.
Yes, please. Come, use the mic.
Hello, sir. So you mentioned in a way that Chinese people, in a way, know more about Kashmiris than actually sort of Indian population. So do you think, I mean, going
I didn't say that. I said I quoted a Chinese scholar who was on a visit to Pakistan occupied Kashmir 15 years back. So he gave a speech. I got a copy of that. I quoted him, and he was saying that not every Chinese, but जो Chinese scholars subject पर काम करते हैं, they are conscious of the fact that Kashmir history is ancient, its historiography is ancient, and he was comparing it to their own tradition. तो उसको वो राजतरंगी, बिकॉज इन इंडिया, इन हिंदू इंडिया, एक ही हिस्ट्री तो कश्मीर से ही आई ना राजतरंगी, बिकॉज हिंदूज है वो एमनेसिया है ना, भूल जाना है, तो जरूरत ही नहीं है कुछ.
Yeah. So have these scholars and their dispensation in China, have they exploited this, and has there been ignorance or lack of clarity from the Indian side geopolitically and diplomatically to this reality? Because historically, that, I mean, not reality, from these arguments of Chinese people.
Again, say it is one.
So scholars, Chinese scholars from Chinese.
Only one scholar.
Yeah.
इसको people कैसे बन गया? It is not a people's movement. I said I quoted one scholar, Chinese scholar. It is in a particular context because he was visiting POK, and there he made a speech about Chinese understanding of Kashmir since old days. So that was an occasion for him because he was in that soil.
So is there acceptance of this argument on some level, or is this just exception?
Acceptance of level by whom?
By maybe public or other scholars.
Which in public, Chinese or Indian?
Chinese, Indian, both, and even Pakistan for that matter.
पाकिस्तान को पता है उनको क्या करना है, आप अपना सोचो. China also knows what they are doing. When I talked to Chinese scholar in बड़ा senior इधर उरुमची में, तो मैंने कहा कि अब if we open this road इधर कश्मीर से, मतलब जो आप कह रहे थे ना BRI या उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, अगर हम चाइना के साथ, अरे मैं बता रहा हूँ आपको, मैं इस पे मथापीची बहुत की है फिजिकली भी लोगों से, तो शीज क्लियर नो, बिकॉज वो पहले कश्मीर आया था 2-3 साल पहले, वो नाटा मिन और समथिंग, वो कह रहा है क्लियर, नो वी डोंट वांट टू गो देयर इज टेररिज्म, देयर इज इस्लाम. मतलब that professor was clearly, because he had seen it himself during his visit to Kashmir University, तो उसने मुझे, मैंने कहा यार we can, जो मैं फर्क दे रहा हूँ कि अगर BRI वो लोग कर रहे हैं, we can also give a counter argument कि हमें लद्दाख, दमचुक, लासा वगैरह रूट for this pilgrimage भी और ट्रेड भी, और सिंचांग को के साथ भी लिंकअप करने के लिए. तो बट ही वाज, दे आर क्लियर, नहीं हमें इस लफड़े में नहीं पड़ना है, यहाँ पे टेररिज्म है, हम लोग और बवाल नहीं ले लेंगे. इसी तरह कजाकिस्तान में एवरीबडी इज क्लियर, सिर्फ यहाँ अनफॉर्चुनेटली पता नहीं क्या मिट्टी है, यहाँ कोई क्लियर किया तो जानबूझ के कंफ्यूज रहते हैं या बनावट करते हैं या जानते नहीं. वहां पे कजाकिस्तान में इवन आई विल साइट उज्बेकिस्तान, ताजिकिस्तान, तुर्कमेनिस्तान आई डिडंट गो, and Afghanistan, when I was invited to give some lectures to their scholars and even diplomatic academy, तो मैंने discussion में कहा कि because in Tajikistan riots took place in 2000 February or something, and मैं से वहाँ से स्लाव मतलब रशियन निकाले गए, उज्बेकिस्तान से निकाले गए, कजाकिस्तान से निकाले गए, किर्गिस्तान से निकाले गए, मामूली अब 1-2% अगर रह रहे हैं तब के ऐसे करके, तो वैसे निकाले गए सब. तो मैंने इनको पूछा, इनको सब पता है, तो नो वी डोंट वांट टू गेट इनटू दिस डिस्कोर्स ऑफ माइनॉरिटी मेजॉरिटी, एवरीबडी इज इक्वल हियर, एवरीबडी इज इक्वल, देयर शुड नॉट बी एनी कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ माइनॉरिटी मेजॉरिटी. हम आपकी तरह पंगा नहीं लेना चाहते, मतलब वो कंफ्यूजन से दूर रहना चाहते हैं. दे वांट टू स्टेयर क्लियर, उनका मोनोइथनिक नेशन बिल्डिंग मॉडल है, वो उसको बनाया है उन्होंने.
Of course, it is based on a lot of falsehood. They have denied. I mean, China has said.
नहीं, मैं इनकी कह रहा हूँ, सेंट्रल मुस्लिम सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक से, इवन अफगानिस्तान की, उधर 30-35% ताजिक है, ताजिक नेशनलिटी अफगानिस्तान में, पख्तून 50 करीब होंगे, हजारा बाकी. तो अब आइडेंटिटी कार्ड बनाए, 5-8 साल पहले स्कीम आई कि आइडेंटिटी आई कार्ड बनाएंगे, अब उसमें लिख रहे हैं ना नेशनलिटी ये. तो जब देखा कि 30-35% ताजिक आ रहे हैं तो खत्म ही करा, इशू ही नहीं करे आई कार्ड. ये है, ये होता है. अपना नेशनल इंटरेस्ट जो पर्सपेक्टिव है नेशन का, वो देखते हैं, उसमें वो कंप्रोमाइज नहीं करते.
One last question from my side. I agree with you that there has been a certain neglect of our interests, both commercial and strategic, with regard to Central Asia. But don't you think one reason this has happened is that at the time of the partition, we lost our contiguity with Central Asia, because in 1947-48, when during the war, we lost much of what was undivided Jammu and Kashmir, and that prevented us from having access to Afghanistan, and via Afghanistan to many other countries of Central Asia. And of course, it also gave a physical contiguity to Pakistan and China. So, in the absence of that physical access on the ground, uh, how difficult do you think it is to follow the kind of consistent, vigorous policy in terms of economic and other links for India?
आपने I have a full chapter in this about this. मैं यही कारण ढूंढने फिजिकली गया था वाखान कॉरिडोर, और जिस जगह मेरे को, और लकीली इट वाज प्रोविडेंस में बाल बच गया, वो 14,000 14,500 जो मेरा लोकल प्रोफेसर बलदोश, वो पामिर का खरो का, वो चलो 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 चलो, ये नहीं पता रहा 14,000 वहां रुक गए रात जुलंदी में, तो बड़ी मुश्किल से वो रात कट गई। बट अगले सुबह जब उतरा तो 500 फुट नीचे उतरे, तब सांस आ गई बराबर। फिर नहीं कहा भाई आगे चलो आगे चलो, तो ही वांटेड टू टेक मी टू द लास्ट विलेज व्हिच इज नोन एज लंगर ऑन द वाखान कॉरिडोर। तो मैं क्या बताऊं, वहां मैं मतलब बहुत परेशान हुआ, क्योंकि जिस पॉइंट पर मेरे को जहां वो ले गया, वो अपने उस पर्पज से नहीं ले गया, वो ले गया अपने, उसका वहां पे एक ऑफिस था, तो ही वांटेड टू शो मी दैट। तो वहां की जो सरपंच थी, तो शी पॉइंट्स टू, ये मैं यहाँ खड़ा हूँ, ऐसे आगे मैदान है, शी पॉइंट्स, दिस इज इंडिया, दिस इज इंडिया। तो मैं हैरान हो गया, ये इंडिया यहाँ पे। फिर आई सून रिकलेक्टेड, एंड मैंने सोचा वो ये तो गिलगित है। सिर्फ 13 या 14 किलोमीटर दूर, आप जो कह रहे 13 किलोमीटर दूर उस पॉइंट से गिलगित था। अंदाजा कीजिए, अगर हमारा गिलगित हमारे पास होता तो आपकी सारी स्ट्रेटेजी, चाइना तो कहीं नहीं रहता हम लोग। और इसमें किसने गद्दारी करी है, अब क्या बताएं, सब गद्दार मिलके, मैंने वो सारी फाइलें पढ़ी, सारी फाइलें,
We will wait for your study.
सारी फाइलें
And we
पढ़ी
will
है।
carry-
एक उसको नाम दिया ऑपरेशन दत्ता खाल, ब्रिटिश ने ऑपरेशन दत्ता खेल नाम दिया। और रिचर्ड बेकन जो ब्रिटिश फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी, नहीं बेकन नहीं, बेकन को उधर पिशावर में लगाए थे, जॉर्ज कनिंगम को भी बिठाया उधर, फिर इधर इसको मेजर ब्राउन को इधर लाया, फिर उधर से वो बोलता है ब्रिटिश फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी इसको, अमेरिकन फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी को, अमेरिका वाज नॉट उतना कीन नहीं था हमको ये डिनाई करने के लिए, बट ये ब्रिटिश जो थे they were clear कि हमें we had to deny India the access।
Yes, exactly.
It was the British who played and their agents, फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी जो अपना, और उनका परपोता भी आजकल यही काम कर रहा है, जो यहाँ पे थे। तो बहुत सारी बरमार है गद्दारों।
Continue this
उसमें
discussion over.
कोई का वहां से कोई रिपोर्ट नहीं इन्होंने, दे डिड एक्ट इंडियन फॉरेन ऑफिस, इतनी डेवलपमेंट वहां हो रही है।
So I take this opportunity to thank Professor Warikoo for his very, very informative and comprehensive lecture. And I thank all members of the audience also for their participation. Thank you.
Thank you.